when the idea that any dream is achievable no longer makes you uneasy, doubt will melt away and faith will be transformed into knowledge. This is a quote from Reality Transurfing, a book written by a Russian, Vadim Zeland, a book that I never thought I would read in my life. It's a huge book. I mean, huge by typical standards, right? I'm talking 500, 600 pages at least or something like this. Like any book on reality and reality creation and the nature of reality and so on, it has some sort of a metaphysical spin, but it presents a very interesting model on how you can make use of your own cognitive abilities and your human constraints at the same time to maximize the chances that you create the kind of reality subjectively that you desire, right? And it's a very it's a very funny thing. It's a very funny story how I ended up finding this book in the first place. Indeed, it's true that I'm somehow fascinated about reality as such, about the nature of it, about our ability to perceive it, to make sense of what's out there, and take everything for granted as if it's just normal to perceive everything like we perceive it. And, the subjective nature of experience is just, how it should be. And at the same time, we know that the universe as such, it's not how we perceive it. How we perceive it is just our own interpretation of it. We don't really know how the objective reality or the objective nature of the universe is, right? Even if we look at it with instruments, with a telescope, with a microscope, yes, we enhance our abilities to see deeper, but ultimately everything is still filtered through our own, cognitive biases. Ultimately, everything gets processed in a biological organ with its limitations, like our brain. Everything is parsed through senses which by their nature are limited in terms of the kind of input they can take. But about the story with reality transurfing. So in this theme, right, on thinking about the nature of reality and so on, I literally dreamt, I had a dream with the word transurfing, if you can imagine that. I'm not saying that I might not have heard it before, maybe, but I never consumed content on this topic as such. And I woke up with transurfing in mind, I mean, who wakes up with the word transurfing? And of course, I started to search on YouTube to see what I find. And there was a guy, Joseph Rodriguez, who had study notes on a book called Reality Transurfing. And I ended up watching that video. I think it's about 1 hour long. He has a lot of book summaries and his own notes on the books, and he just reads them and comments them in long form, in long form videos on YouTube. And I loved his summaries, and I loved also the way he narrates things. So I started to watch. So two things happened, right? I started to follow and watch Joseph Rodriguez videos. And then I also started to read Reality Transurfing myself. And I must say that it's my favorite book all time, because I think it's an incredibly smooth merge or blend of fiction and non-fiction in my mind. I'm not a fiction reader, despite popular, I would say, trends, at least in the sphere of technology people and engineering minds, everyone likes science fiction. I don't like science fiction because I think I had, when I was little, some bad experience with watching some monsters in a movie or something, and I got scared. And from that point on, I think I was slightly traumatized, with like a small T, small T trauma, but it was enough not to want to watch science fiction movies. And I think that, translated also to reading books and so on. But reality transurfing, again, it's a model of parsing reality and making sense of what's out there in a way that is logical and forces your mind to stretch to a point where, of course, most statements, or let's say not most statements, but some statements are not possible to be backed by science today. And I like that because I know at the same time that there are things which cannot be really explained by science or by the instrument of science as we implement it today to find objective truth from the universe. We discover stuff. But the nature of science is to discover things that are already there, right? Before we discovered the laws of physics, the laws of thermodynamics, before we discovered everything that we now take for granted in terms of the instruments of physics, based on which we create, technology, they existed before, right? Human beings appeared in this world. Thanks to this evolving technical abilities, we imagined a method through which we can test hypotheses, validate them, and then, create terms, create definitions and principles and theories based on which we can now, in the end, act in the universe, right? We know what we could expect from having a certain interaction with the world at large, right? Thanks now to the laws of physics that we discover. But the laws themselves, they were there before we discovered them. And I could imagine that there are still a lot of things in terms of how reality is being rendered, objectively in this moment, in this timeless present moment that we live, and our ability to parse it and how everything works, right? In terms of neurophysiology, in terms of how the brain works, in terms of how we interpret signals, how the signals are being processed in the mind, in the brain, how the mind makes sense of that information, and how that information is transformed into subjective experience, right? There are a lot of things to be still discovered there. So I'm not in the camp of saying, look, I have to first see everything proved by science in order to believe in it. I think that's too limitative. And I only have one life. And I want sometimes to be carried away by the beauty of an interesting hypothetical theory, at least. There is some beauty in there. And what I know is that ultimately, no matter what science says, what matters most is what we believe to be true. That's a very important detail because in life, our subjective experience is more or less exclusively influenced by what we believe to be real, right? And the obvious example here is the flat Earth community. You have a lot of science, confirming the fact that the Earth is at least not flat, and you have a lot of people who come to the conclusion that the Earth is flat against like very complex narratives. Some of them are intelligent people, and they come and they use this intelligence, this cognitive ability, the complex mechanisms in their brain to come up with theories that invalidate hundreds of years of proof that the Earth is round or spherical, right? It's not flat, at least. So ultimately, what matters is what you believe is true, and that's a powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing, and it's I don't know. I'm very, as you might see, I'm smiling all the time, because I think I reached a point in my development where I realized that it's my responsibility exclusively to make sense of everything that's happening to me in the best way possible, conducive to my goal. And just to close the thing related to reality being what we perceive to be, I want to give you another quote from Einstein. So Einstein is confirmed on sources on the web to have said this. So he said that the most important decision we make is whether we believe we live in a friendly or a hostile universe. So Einstein said that beliefs are decisions, right? The most important decision we make is whether we believe we live in a friendly or a hostile universe. So if beliefs are decisions, which is also something that later on is confirmed and actively mentioned on his channel by David Bayer. David Bayer, he's a non-personality in the personal development space. He wrote a very nice book, A Changed Mind. I definitely recommend it. And he says the same thing. He reached also this conclusion after years and years of struggle on the personal path of personal development and the typical pitfalls and so on, that this was liberating for him. And I reached also the point where I find this liberating. Because if beliefs are decisions, and we know that beliefs are core to how we interpret what happens to us, then if we simply decide to believe something else, we can literally turn a hostile universe into a friendly universe. And what can be more powerful and exciting than this idea? So imagine that you live in a world of hostility, and you have indeed proof your whole life that it is the case. And there are people who live traumatic childhoods, and even in their adult development, they don't receive good treatment from society. How difficult would be for them to believe that they live in a friendly universe? It's almost virtually impossible, right? At the same time, it's still a belief, right? But that belief became their core objective truth simply because they have so much proof in their life to demonstrate themselves that indeed the universe is hostile. But it's still a belief, right? They used their lived experience as a confirmation for something that ultimately dictates how they perceive reality. And you always have this choice. The fact that we have, although, independent of our living circumstances, the fact that we have this choice, it's very empowering if you choose to see it like that. Of course, there is this tendency of saying, okay, I'm a victim. The universe is definitely hostile. I live in very bad conditions, and there is some God there that wants me to suffer, or some entity there that doesn't love me and wants to punish me. And that's a very natural conclusion to come to, right? The problem is that you can also see it as an incredibly powerful test of faith. That if you resolve, then you get unbelievable positive outcomes out of it, right? I always think of Tony Robbins and his childhood. Tony Robbins is today the most prominent figure and the most influential person in this space of personal growth and personal transformation. He touched really, like literally, the lives of millions of people. He saved many people from suicide. So he was a lot of people's last chance, to give another try to this life. But he had like a very rough childhood. He had an abusive alcoholic mother, who threw him out of the house, literally at some point. I think he was 16 or something like this, threatening him with a knife. Can you imagine, like, threatening your own son with a knife and throwing him out of the house? He says that she wouldn't have killed him, but anyway, it was a very bad situation, so he had to leave. And I'm pretty sure, of course, I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty confident that if he wouldn't have had this life, he wouldn't have had this drive and energy to, first of all, overcome his own condition and then try to compensate for what he lacked and become the person who is now, who can touch the lives of others and improve their own life and their life of their families overall. And that's so powerful because, of course, he could have had all the justification in the world that his life is bad and that he needs to be pitied and that he needs help and his mother is an aggressor, and she was, of course. But imagine how many reasons Tony Robbins would have had to just default into anger and revenge and do bad things overall in general, right? And thankfully, he was able to go beyond that initial aggression and transcend his own condition and evolve. And that's beautiful. And in my opinion, this is what every single person should do or should strive to do. Some of us, we manage to do it. For others, it's just not possible. And there is no condemnation in that. Because life is tough, right? And if you don't have the proper context, the right people and support around you, it's indeed virtually impossible to get out of that place. But let's go back to beliefs are decisions, because this is the most important thing that I can think of. If you really internalize this, if you decide to believe something else than your current beliefs, you go against your very own self in a way. Because the way that your reality is being rendered by your own brain, by your own mind, is against predictable projections, predictable perceptions, right? You experience something in your life, then based on that, you project in the future what could be a potential outcome based on the experience that you have. So you use the proof that you collected from similar experiences to anticipate, the outcome in a similar way against known patterns. So you recognize a pattern from your past and you project that pattern in the future. And this is basically how you live in perpetuity in the past, in a way. This is how you end up reliving and reinforcing a traumatic event. You live something, this is post-traumatic stress disorder, right? PTSD. You live a traumatic experience, and then you always, in real time in your life, in your present moment, you anticipate a similarly bad outcome in the future. So everything that has a similar pattern in terms of initial conditions of a potentially dangerous situations, you anticipate it and you fabricate it in your mind and you blow it out of proportion simply because you expect it to be that bad, right? You believe you live in a hostile universe. You believe that things are bad and will blow up all the time around you, right? So the saying that seeing is believing, I think, is not as real and as true and as powerful as believing is seeing. Because what you believe to be true, the brain will manufacture literally the subjective experience to match that belief. If you believe that the world is a hostile world, your brain will actively try to fabricate experiences and life events that will give you the confirmation that indeed that's the case. And that's so, on the one side, it's such a nasty mechanism if you think about it, because you get to relive or to confirm something that you are familiar with. The brain wants to project in your future a situation or an interpretation that is familiar to you, because that is meant ultimately to keep you safe, right? If you believe and right? So like internalized beliefs, like core beliefs, are your subjective. So we all live in subjective reality, right? My reality is subjective, your reality is subjective. It's slightly different. You have slightly different interpretations of things. But from an individual and pure experiential point of view, my life experience is my objective reality, right? From my point of view, this is reality. So it's objective in the sense that I don't question it, right? I parse it, I interpret it naturally, subconsciously most of the time, and I take it to be my objective reality. But that's in relative terms. In absolute terms, reality is always subjective. Reality is always perceived by a person, interpreted by that person, and then that gives you some sort of an experience. So if you believe that reality is, hostile, then you will get the confirmation for that, right? And there is another quote. I think it was like, if you believe you can make it or you can't, you're right. I mean, these things would not remain, propagated through history if they would not have some seed of truth, right? If they would not be true. And also, like, seemingly basic quotes that you hear all the time, they hide some seed of truth in them. And that's amazing, right? So if you believe you can or you can't, you're right. And I have an extensive proof myself to know that this is true, right? I know this is true because for the biggest part of my life, I'm almost 37 now, 36 and a half. For the first 30 years of my life, I was defending, by all means, a negative projection on my own reality, right? I was always finding problems and why things cannot work. And because I was so ruthlessly focusing on elements that could break something and not make it work, I most of the time found enough of them to prove to myself that I was right. And I reinforced that belief, right? So this cannot work, this is bad, this cannot work, this is very complicated, and I was right. Most of the time I was right. And that reinforced my belief that indeed I'm right and that indeed things, are difficult. I was calling myself in retrospect, right? I'm calling myself now in retrospect, but this is how I perceive how I was acting in the world, as a pragmatic pessimist, right? Well, I was pessimist. I knew that I was not optimist, but I was also pragmatic. So in a way, I had like a rational justification of my pessimistic, approach to life. And now it's so clear to me that because I believed that things will not work, and I was intelligent enough I was focusing exclusively on those elements which validate my premise. Because my brain wanted to keep me safe. My brain wanted to give me the confirmation that I know what I'm doing. My brain doesn't try to confuse me or put me on the wrong direction. My mind was like, okay, so you think this is complicated, right? Let's fine tune. Let's focus exclusively on those elements that will confirm to you that indeed you're right. Because we want to be in coherence. We don't want to now be exposed, right, to elements that would give you a different kind of understanding, because then it will break you, right? You will not make sense of your subjective reality anymore. You have to see things in a way that makes sense for you. So we all navigate this life with our projected, anticipations, if you want. We anticipate things to be in a certain way simply because we experience them in a certain way. But if those expectations happen to be negative, guess who's suffering? Not me, if I'm not doing it, right? So beliefs are decisions. If you believe that what's happening to you is a test of faith, for example, and is meant for you to prove to yourself that you can actually do the thing you want to do, to have the outcome you want to have, then your mind will interpret that obstacle in that frame. Framing is everything in life. I think there are a few words that are core for my understanding of the world and how I try to live my life day by day. Framing, because if everything I live is subjective, based on my own understanding and interpretation of the world, then how I frame things changes the narrative behind and allows me to build the kind of beliefs that I care about building so that I reach whatever outcome I want in life. I don't take things anymore at face value using through the default interpretation of how things are. Nothing is as it is. Everything is as I see it to be. That's very clear for me today. So, very important word, right? Framing, perspective. This is important. Decisions, right? Beliefs, decisions. Decisions is something subjective, right? It's my own understanding, my own belief. I decided to be like that. And based on my decision, I create the way I look at things and the way I experience life itself. Because that decision, with enough reinforcement, will become my core belief. And I will not question it anymore, right? And intention. Intention is also a nice word that I think I sedimented like about 1.5 years ago. Intention is basically the seed I plant when it comes down to the outcome that I desire. I want this to happen. I have zero control of it actually happening. So I don't cling to that outcome. I don't get emotionally attached to it because that creates a resistance. When you want something so bad, you inevitably reject it simply because you give in by the nature of how the mind works, to the hypothetical negative scenarios which would not allow you to get to that destination. This is why when you really, really, really want something, by all means, you create so much importance for that outcome that you inevitably start to resist it because you invite the possibility of a different outcome. You start to be anxious, and then you put a lot of energy in developing negative scenarios that could happen, that could not, allow you to enjoy the outcome that you want. And this is the reason why most people fail to reach the outcome that they want. And this is why most people suffer in this world where they live in incredible comfort, in comfort that no king had 1,000 years ago. We have everything ready. We have everything available to us. We don't even have to go out of our homes to get everything. And we still live depressed and anxious and scared and frustrated and, you name it. Such a pity, right? So intention is what you want, right? But you don't get attached to that again because you don't have control over it. You do whatever you can do against your own core values, which values, I found a definition in a book, Transform Yourself, where they say that values are generalization of experiences that are important to you. So the more you engage in life activities that create, that make up a good experience for you, an important experience for you, they hide your values, right? It could be family, it could be friendship, it could be gratitude, it could be courage, right? You value joy, you value happiness, right? Whatever experience creates something important for you, typically it has a value behind it. So whenever you want to achieve something, you plant the seed, right? And it's enough to plant the seed simply because, again, it's ultimately your own responsibility to reach that outcome. It's your responsibility to frame reality in a way against beliefs that you get to artificially somehow create for yourself through decisions, right? And those beliefs, by the nature of you accumulating proof to reinforce them, will take you in the direction of your goal. This is how you get to achieve whatever you want. On this topic of success and goals, I think there are countless books, and ultimately everyone has to find their own method, their own secret. And it all starts ultimately with the definition of the word, right? You have to know what you want. And everyone says, yeah, it's normal. But very few people actually know what they want. And first, I was very intrigued when I heard a short on YouTube, I think 2 years ago, of Oprah, any other person, like Oprah Winfrey. And she was interviewed by a guy, I think it was a late night show or something. Just so you know that if you look for stuff, even subconsciously, sometimes you get to be exposed to a word, to a person, to a phrase, to a sentence, to something that becomes meaningful to you and could be an inflection point. Simply because that resonates with you in that moment, at that time, said with that intonation by that person, flip something in you. And that's an inflection point. And it's very difficult to anticipate that, right? You are seeking something, you want to learn something, you want to find some truth. And then you expose yourself to the world, and then something happens, you hear something, and then boom. And this is what happened to me, right? I was consuming a lot of content at the time. I was interested, in personal growth and transformation. I was learning about, also the physical aspects, the health, metabolism, and so on, nutrition. I was learning a lot. But in terms of success and goals creation and what does it mean to be successful and so on, I had no idea what it means, right? I had some generic understanding of it. And then I heard this short clip with Oprah. And basically she was asked by this guy, why do you think that most people don't get to where they want to go, or something like this? And she said, well, first of all, people don't know where they want to go. And that stopped me in my tracks. And I was like, yeah, indeed. People don't know where they want to go. Because if you don't know where you want to go, every road can take you there, right? If you don't know where you want to go, every road can take you there. So first, it's your responsibility to know where you want to go. And your mind and you as a human being, you know what road is good for you. Because even if you don't choose that destination, even if you don't choose a purposeful goal, something that should guide your everyday experience, if you live in opposition to that, if your life experience is not in line with that implicit purpose that you have, but you didn't articulate yet, you will not enjoy your life. You will become, triggered. You will experience internal friction. You will suffer. You will not know why. And you will start to judge life because it's, cruel and throws at you unwanted events. And this is like that. And why is it raining today? And why do I have to stay in this traffic? And I hate my job and my life sucks and all this kind of stuff. Well, they appear simply because you cannot make sense of your life in the context of something that is meaningful to you. You don't have the premise for framing your subjective experience of life in a constructive way. If you would be on a path towards a goal, if you would have an intention to reach some destination and reach a goal, then everything that would happen to you through your own subjective interpretation of it would potentially be a positive thing, right? Because you would say, okay, I know that I know that I want to go there. This is what happens to me. It means that I need this. It means that this is a lesson I have to learn, because this lesson, this experience happens on the path between this moment and the moment when I will reach my goal. Because reaching that goal is my decision, right? It's not something hypothetical. It's not something that I might make it or I might not make it. That's my goal. That's my decision. If I can imagine it, if I can picture it in my mind, if it makes sense for me, if I resonate with it, if I allow myself to dream it fully, then it's mine. So why be anxious about it, right? So it means that if I decide to reach that destination, which again, that decision transforms into a belief, and belief is something that you can enforce through actual living and proof that you can accumulate in your life, right? And there's a process for that. If you decide to reach that destination, then you will just make the most out of everything that happens to you, right? You don't know how you will reach that destination. If it's a big goal, you cannot have a well-defined plan in your mind from the beginning. So you have to be open to opportunities that could potentially take you there much faster than you could have arrived there through the nature of you implementing, your own low-level plan created by your own mind 4 months ago when, there were so many things that you didn't know at the time, for example. And to go back to the initial quote from Vadim Zeland in Reality Transurfing, when the idea that any dream is achievable no longer makes you uneasy, doubt will melt away and faith will be transformed into knowledge. You see, another word that I really love, besides beliefs, decisions, intention, framing, is transformation. Transformation is a very powerful word because it implies that you change your form. And if you think about evolution, it forced transformation throughout the millions, billions of years. Evolution forces transformation, right? Species of animals and plants, they change shape, they become something else, right? Through the evolutionary pressure. But transformation is something that we also can do in the context of our own lives. I like to associate transformation in my mind with alchemy. Alchemy is this esoteric concept of transforming basic ordinary metal into gold. The philosophical interpretation of alchemy for me is to transform something seemingly useless into gold, into theoretical gold, right? Into something that is highly important to you. So alchemy for me is a transformation process, right? The most basic and valuable transformation process is action, or through action in life. We can transform information, for example, into knowledge, right? You learn about something, you read something, and that makes sense to you when you read it. That thing becomes, at that point, potential knowledge. If you let it there latent, if you don't make anything with it, that information not only will not transform into knowledge, but it will transform into anxiety. Why is that? Because you don't have an experience to back up that information. And the more information you accumulate, the more potential knowledge you have, and the more hypothetical scenarios you can create out of them, which, if they don't translate into something concrete, so that you can strip away all those information which actually didn't help and stay with the outcome of the applied information that now is knowledge, because you lived it, you transformed it into experience, you will become anxious, right? So ultimately, everything in life is about collecting proof and validating hypotheses experientially for yourself. You have to become your own scientist in your own life. You learn about something, you apply that something in your life, you learn the outcome of it, and that now you know that thing, right? You don't know about it, you know it. I lived it, right? Now, because I lived it, now I know it. And then that knowledge gets away from your running memory, right, in your day-to-day, and gets transformed into procedural knowledge, potentially, right? You know how to do stuff, you know things, not just at an informational point of view, at the high level, superficial level, but in their true nature. So I think this is a topic that takes hours and days to discuss about, because it has all sorts of ramifications and it can influence your life in all sorts of different ways. But it's a fascinating exploration, because learning about yourself, learning about how your mind works, why it works like that, what can you do about it if you don't like how it works, all this is possible. All this is in your grasp. And with practice, you can literally frame everything in a way that subjectively is leading you to live a successful and fulfilling life, which I am personally happy and grateful to admit that at almost 37, despite not being a billionaire or living on an island, I have a successful life and I am very fulfilled and very happy. And by my definition, a successful life requires some very simple elements, right? To be healthy, to have a family that loves you and you love being with, to be able to be authentic, which means to feel okay with being yourself at all times, to feel good about yourself when you are by yourself, to not think that you have to wear always a mask, unapologetically authentic, I like to call it, to have the courage to do the things that allow you to grow, to be able to trust your own advice and trust in your own ability to achieve whatever you want. For me, this is a successful life, because then I don't rely or I don't expect the help of any individual to live my best life. Right? Living my best life is in my own grasp, and I'm responsible for meeting all the conditions that give me that life. And I'm just a simple person. I'm no special, but I am successful, and I have everything that I ever wanted. And just realizing that and being grateful for it, it's an absolutely amazing feeling. Um, and and bridging this and holding this precious recognition of the fact that I have everything that I want and I ever will want, while being able to still grow and achieve things and aspire to reach new levels and help people and have all sorts of projects. Being able to hold both, like the current situation and being happy with what I have, and also continue to progress in my life without anxiety, without worry. Um, it's amazing. So, if you want to be challenged, read Reality Transurfing. It's not a beginner's book, but the guy is amazing and has such a nice and poetic, often, ways of describing things. And it's just a nice book, a very nice book. So I wish you luck. Um, Decide to live the life that you want. Remember that beliefs are decisions. Remember that ultimately what you can do in life is to place an intention of what you want to achieve, and then it's your own responsibility and sole responsibility to make it. Doesn't mean that you cannot get support from the outside, but don't cast away your responsibility for getting to wherever you want to go. Define that first, and then know that you can make it there. Right. So for the third time, I think, at least, I will read again this quote that I ordered, like a frame. I framed it. I placed an order on Etsy with this quote. I will put it in my room. So, when the idea that any dream is achievable no longer makes you uneasy, doubt will melt away, and faith will be transformed into knowledge. I leave you with that. All the best.